The sound wasn't a boom. It wasn't an explosion like they show in the movies. It was a snap, a sharp, dry crack, like a dead branch breaking in a winter forest, but amplified 1,000 times by the crushing weight of rock. Silas froze. His hand hovered over the controls of the continuous miner. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. The dust in the air suddenly stopped swirling, hanging suspended in the beam of his caplight. In that split second of terrible silence, before the ceiling came down, Silas didn't think about the coal. He thought about the letter sitting on his kitchen table, and the promise he had failed to keep. The alarm clock on the bedside table didn't buzz. It rattled. It was 3:30 in the morning, an hour that belongs to no one but the ghosts and the miners. Silas Vance reached out a calloused hand and silenced the noise before it could wake Martha. The house was cold. The floorboards of the small company house in Matuan groaned under his boots. He moved through the darkness by memory, a habit learned from years of working where the sun never touched. He washed his face in the kitchen sink. The water was icy, smelling faintly of iron and sulfur. It was the smell of the region, the smell of the job, the smell that seeped into your pores and never really washed out. Silas looked at his reflection in the window glass. He was 45, but the lines around his eyes said 60. Coal dust had tattooed itself into the creases of his neck, a permanent shadow that marked him as a man of the deep mines. He packed his lunch pail, a bologna sandwich wrapped tight in wax paper, an apple that was slightly bruised, a thermos of coffee, black as the seam he was heading to mine. It was the same lunch he had packed for 20 years. The drive to the tipple was quiet. The headlights cut through the heavy mountain fog that clung to the hollows. He passed the sleeping houses of his neighbors, men who would soon be rising to take the next shift, or men who were already gone. At the bathhouse, the locker room was filled with a low murmur of men resigning themselves to the day. There was no loud laughter this morning, just the clank of metal lockers and the rustle of heavy canvas clothes. "Morning, Silas," a voice grunted. It was Big Jim, a man whose shoulders were as wide as a doorway. Silas nodded, pulling on his coveralls. They were stiff with dried sweat and grime. "Feels heavy today." "Jim," Silas said quietly, "air outside feels like rain. You know how the mountain gets when it rains." Jim nodded solemnly. Moisture made the slate heavy. It made the roof unstable. They grabbed their belts, clicking on the heavy battery packs for their cap lights. The self-rescuer, that metal box that was supposed to give you an hour of air if the world ended, hung heavy on his hip. The cage ride down was the transition. It was where you left the world of the living and entered the underworld. The metal gate clattered shut. The winch engine whined, and the floor dropped out from under them. Don't they went past the water table, past the roots of ancient trees. 300 feet. 400. The air pressure changed, popping their ears. The temperature stabilized to a cool, damp 55 degrees. When the cage hit the bottom, the darkness was total. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was a physical weight. Silas clicked on his lamp. The beam cut a cone through the dust. He was home. While Silas walked the mile-long trek to the face of the coal, Martha was waking up. The sun was just cresting the ridge, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. On the table lay the stack of bills, the medical costs for her asthma, the tuition for their daughter, Sarah, who was the first Vance to ever try for college. That tuition was the reason Silas picked up the double shifts. She looked at the empty chair where Silas had sat hours ago. She hated the mine. She hated the way it stole his breath, leaving him coughing into a handkerchief in the evenings. She hated the way it took his energy, leaving him too tired to speak. But she respected it. It was the only thing that put food on the table in Mingo County. It was the devil they knew. She traced the rim of the coffee cup, whispering a silent prayer, just as she did every morning. Bring him back. Back underground. The machinery was roaring to life. The continuous miner, a massive beast of steel and rotating teeth, sat waiting at the face of the seam. Silas climbed into the operator's seat. He was the best operator in the county. He could feel the vibration of the machine, sensing the difference between good soft coal, and the hard, dangerous rock of the roof. It was an intuition born of survival. Beside him was a kid named Toby. Toby was green, only 19 years old. He still had the spark in his eyes, the belief that he would only do this for a summer to buy a car. Silas knew better. The mine had a way of keeping you. "Watch the ribs, Toby," Silas shouted over the roar of the hydraulics. "That left wall looks loose. Don't get between the buggy and the wall. Never turn your back on the rock." Toby nodded, his face already smeared with black dust. He looked at Silas with something like hero worship. To the boy, Silas was the mountain itself, immovable, knowledgeable, safe. But Silas didn't feel safe. He felt the vibration in the floor. The mountain was groaning today. It was a subtle sound, a low-frequency hum that you felt in your teeth more than you heard with your ears. He paused the machine, letting the silence rush back in for a moment. He looked up at the roof bolts, the metal rods pinned into the stone to hold the ceiling up. They were under the Widowmaker, a section of the mine known for shifting slate. "What is it, boss?" Toby asked, his voice cracking slightly. Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice into the darkness. "Just listening, kid. The mountain talks. You just gotta learn to listen." It happened at 11:15 a.m. They were cutting deep into the seam, the teeth of the miner tearing away tons of black gold. The dust was thick, a swirling fog that tasted of carbon and ancient earth. Silas felt the drop before he heard it. The air pressure in the tunnel suddenly spiked, sucking the air out of his lungs for a fraction of a second. It was the displacement of air caused by a massive fall somewhere nearby. Then came the sound. Crock. It sounded like a gunshot right next to his ear. The roof bolts pinged and snapped, firing downward like bullets. "Back! Get back!" Silas screamed, throwing the machine into reverse. But the floor was heaving. The earth pitched sideways, throwing Toby against the jagged wall of coal. The roar was deafening. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation. Thousands of tons of rock, sandstone, and slate were coming down. The light from Silas's cap spun wildly as he was knocked from the operator's seat. Dust billowed out, instantly blinding them. It filled his nose, his mouth, his eyes. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't see. He curled into a ball, covering his head with his arms, waiting for the crushing weight to end it all. Then, silence. A silence so profound it hurt. The roar of the machinery was gone. The ventilation fans were gone. The only sound was the settling of dust and the frantic, shallow breathing of a man in terror. Silas coughed, a racking, painful spasm. He wiped the grit from his eyes and clicked his light. The beam hit a wall of rock where the exit used to be. The tunnel had collapsed 10 feet behind them. He swung the light the other way. Blocked. They were in a pocket. A coffin of stone, perhaps 20 feet long and 12 feet wide. The continuous miner was half buried, its steel teeth silenced. "Toby!" Silas croaked. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the rock. "Toby, sound off." A whimper came from the corner. Silas crawled over the debris, his knees scraping on sharp shale. He found the boy huddled against the rib, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Toby was hyperventilating. "We're dead. We're buried." "Oh, God, Silas. We're buried." The boy's eyes were wide, white rims and a black face, staring at the ceiling that was now mere inches above his head in places. Silas grabbed the boy's shoulders. He shook him hard. "Look at me! Look at me, son. Are you broken? Can you move your legs?" Toby nodded, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. I think so. But the air..." The fans stopped. Silas looked at his self-rescuer. He looked at the sealed tomb. "Calm down. Panic burns oxygen. You panic, you die. You breathe slow, you live. Understand. Time loses its meaning underground. Without the sun, without a shift clock, Minutes stretch into hours. Silas checked his watch. 1 p.m. They had been trapped for nearly 2 hours. The air was getting heavy. It was becoming stale. Warmer, thicker. Carbon dioxide was building up. It makes you sleepy first, then gives you a headache. Then you just drift away. Silas sat with his back against a block of coal, turning his lamp off to save the battery. Darkness was absolute. "Toby!" he said into the black. "Tell me about that car you want to buy." "A Mustang." Toba's voice floated back, weak and trembling. "Cherry red. 1969. I was going to fix the transmission." "That's a good car," Silas said. He forced his breathing to be shallow. In, hold, out. In, hold, out. "My first car was a beat-up Ford truck. Spent more time under it than in it." He was keeping the boy talking, keeping him awake. If Toby fell asleep, he might not wake up. But Silas was struggling too. His head pounded like a drum. Visions started to swim in the darkness. He saw Martha standing in the tunnel, holding the stack of bills. He saw his daughter, Sarah, walking across a graduation stage, but the stage was made of coal. "Silas," Toby whispered. "I hear them. I hear the angels." "No, you don't," Silas snapped, though his own heart hammered. "That's the mountains settling. Stay with me, kid." Silas reached for his lunch pail, which had survived the fall. He opened the thermos. It was still lukewarm. Here, he guided the cup to where he thought Toby was. "Drink. It'll warm you." They shared the coffee in the dark, a communion of the doomed. The liquid tasted like life. It tasted like the world above. Suddenly, a new sound. Tap, ... tap. It wasn't the mountain. It was rhythmic, metallic. Silas scrambled to the wall of the collapse. He picked up a heavy wrench from the floor. He struck the roof, bolt plate. Clang, ... clang. He waited. Tap, ... tap, ... tap. "They're drilling," Silas whispered, a surge of adrenaline cutting through the fog of carbon dioxide. "They're drilling the rescue hole." "Toby, get up! Get close to the wall!" But the air was so bad now. Silas felt his limbs growing heavy, like they were filled with lead. He slumped against the cold rock. He had to keep banging. He had to let them know. He struck the metal again. His arm felt weak. Clang. "Silas, ... Toby's voice was fading. "I'm tired. Don't you close your eyes." Silas roared, summoning the last of his strength. "Think about the Mustang. Think about the girl you're going to drive in it." Silas struck the wall again, and again, and again, until his hands blistered, until the wrench slipped from his grip. He leaned his forehead against the cold, wet coal. "Martha," he whispered, "I'm sorry about the tuition." The sound of the drill grew louder. It became a vibration that rattled their teeth. Then a breakthrough. A small probe broke through the ceiling debris, accompanied by a rush of fresh, cool air. It hissed like a serpent, but it smelled like heaven. It smelled like rain and diesel and pine trees. Silas dragged himself toward the airflow, pulling Toby with him. "Breathe," Silas commanded, shoving the boy's face near the opening. Voices came down the small pipe. Distorted, tinny, but human. "Can you hear me? Tap twice. If you can hear me." Silas found a rock and tapped the pipe. Clink, clink. "We hear you. We're coming." "Hang on, boys. We're coming in from the side drift." It took another 4 hours. 4 hours of huddling in the dark, sharing the small stream of air. But the fear had changed. It wasn't the fear of death anymore. It was the painful hope of life. When the light broke through, it blinded them. A hole opened in the ruble wall, and the beam of a rescue lamp cut the gloom. C2. Rough hands grabbed Silas. Men in rescue gear, masked and heavy, pulled him through the narrow gap. He scraped his ribs. He tore his coveralls, but he didn't care. They loaded them onto stretchers. The ride to the surface was a blur of lights and voices. Check his vitals. Get oxygen on him. Easy on the leg. Then, the cage ride up. The reverse of the morning. The air pressure dropped. The temperature rose. When the cage gate opened, the world was blindingly bright. It was nighttime, but the floodlights of the mine yard turned it into day. There were ambulances. There were shouting men. And there was the crowd. The wives, the mothers, the children who had been standing by the fence for 12 hours, staring at the shaft. Silas blinked, his eyes streaming tears from the light. He saw her. Martha broke through the line of police. She didn't look at his dirty face or his bloody hands. She just grabbed him. She buried her face in his coal-stained chest and sobbed. It was a sound of pure release. Silas wrapped his arms around her, feeling the solid reality of her. He looked over her shoulder and saw Toby being hugged by his father. Silas took a deep breath. The air outside tasted different now. It tasted sweet. Silas didn't go back to the mine for 3 weeks. He sat on his porch, watching the sun move across the valley, listening to the birds. He watched Sarah do her homework at the kitchen table. But the bills were still there. The tuition was still due. One Tuesday morning, before the sun came up, Silas woke up. The alarm hadn't gone off yet. He sat on the edge of the bed. Martha shifted in her sleep. "Silas," she whispered, "are you going?" Silas looked at his hands. The cold dust was still in the creases. It would never leave him. He was a miner. It was who he was. It was how he loved his family, not with words, but with the sweat he left in the dark. "Yeah, Martha," he said softly, standing up and reaching for his work clothes. "I'm going." The mountains, waiting. He drove to the tipple, in silence. He saw Toby's car in the lot. The boy was there, too. They nodded at each other as they geared up. No words were needed. They got in the cage. The gate clanged shut, and together they descended back into the dark, carrying the light with them.